Thanks again, guys, for coming out on Friday morning. I also wanted to say, if anyone has questions that they don't feel comfortable raising their hand and answering, you can always tweet at us. I'm Miranda RHK. I'm the moderator, so I'm happy to pass those questions on. And then Nancy and Justina have their Twitter handles up there as well. So next up, we would like to welcome, joining us from Chicago, Nancy Harmon, who's the Chief Curatorial Officer of Encurate Mobile Technology, and Justina Doyle, who's the Director of Education and Special Events at the International Museum of Surgical Science. They'll be presenting mobile as a platform for untold stories. They'll be discussing how this beacon-based mobile app at their museum tells the story of the woman who built the historic home the museum is housed in. And I just want to throw in there, I was fortunate enough that I got to go test this app because I'm also in Chicago, and I'm super excited to hear their presentation. So thanks, everyone.
Good morning, I'm Nancy.
And I'm Justina.
At Encurate, museums use our tools to create better, stronger mobile apps, and we're doing it utilizing beacons. We're using beacons as a tool to spark curiosity among visitors, which keeps them in the museum longer and inspires them to come back for more. Beacons are a low-energy Bluetooth device. It sends a signal to an app without the need for Wi-Fi, GPS, cell service. It's an excellent spatial awareness tool, allowing you to highlight an object or an artifact or a space in your museum by sending a notification to the visitor once they come into the vicinity of that object. The museum community already knows that visitors are using their phones when they visit the museum, but providing a mobile app to your visitor is giving them a tool that they already know how to use intimately. They're using it every single day. And then by strengthening your mobile app with beacons, you can provide location awareness, detailed spatial awareness, collect analytical information, highlight spaces and objects and stories that may otherwise go unnoticed. And at IMSS, they are highlighting a story that they aren't able to tell in their exhibition space at all.
And now I'd like to talk a little bit more about the museum itself. Our building was built in 1917. It's on the National Register of Historic Places. It opened as a museum in 1954. We have 4 floors of museum space, over 20,000 artifacts. We have beautiful architecture, including Italian marble floors, walnut wood panels, French-inspired fireplaces. This beautiful woman on the screen is Eleanor Robinson Countess. She is the woman that built our home. She hosted many of Chicago's elite in the home. She rolled bandages for the Red Cross. She stood on Lakeshore Drive and collected money for the war effort. And all of these details are not currently included in the museum's exhibit space at all. We currently focus on medical history and surgical science. So as you can see, we have many untold stories in our space. We decided to create Candlelit Tours to tell our story, and we used a memoir written by Eleanor's daughter for the content. These tours were very popular, but they were extremely limited for us. We only have 3 staff members full-time at the museum. We could only really afford to have the tours, about 2 tours every other month, and only about 60 people per tour. So as you can see, we really needed a way to get the information about the home and the family that lived in the home to our visitors, and that's when we decided to partner with Encurate.
One of the first questions that I get, and I think is really common, is to say, okay, well, our space is ready to create a mobile app, and we want to move forward with this, but what does that look like? What are the first steps?
So we knew what themes we wanted to use for the app content based on the information that was most popular during our guided tours. So we really looked at what visitors were responding most to and went from there. For the media for the app, we chose historic photos from Eleanor's memoir that I mentioned before.
And then based on what you're including in the app, that's how you decide where to place your beacons. So where do you want your visitor to be physically in your space when they're receiving that content and that story? And then using our content creation platform, the museum can do all of this in one space. And with features like drag and drop and a media gallery and a word processor, you're able to do it quickly without it being time consuming. And then you can update and change your content as often as you like, which keeps your mobile app relevant in your space. This is the museum's library. It's one of my favorite rooms in the museum. And when the visitor walks in and they're using the mobile, they're not talking about the surgical library, but now we're talking about Eleanor's library. And she used to have these parties in the library with just a few people from Chicago. There was a grand piano in the corner. And with the historic photos and talking about that, we've included quotes. The visitor gets that experience when they go into the library. On the third floor of the mansion is where Eleanor's bedroom and dressing room was. And with the beacons, you can highlight more things that aren't necessarily on exhibition, and that's what we have done here. Eleanor's safe is still in her dressing room closet. The museum uses it as storage, but we're able to use the mobile to talk about that it's still there and it's in the closet. In the museum's foyer, when the visitor walks in for their first visit to the museum, then we can talk about an entire room that isn't available to the visitor. So when you go in and you're in the foyer, we talk about that you're standing over the basement and that Eleanor in the 1920s had a dark room down there and she was an aspiring photographer. One of the biggest challenges with mobile apps that we're really focusing on is marketing your app. Any project that you create at your museum, the visitor can't use it, they can't enjoy it if you don't tell them that it's there. And so we tried something a little bit different. The App Store has been in the app for a little over 60 days now, and for the first 2 weeks or so, we didn't have any marketing, none. No paper marketing, it wasn't on the website, we didn't talk about it on social media. We had about a 5% download rate. And then we still didn't put anything up, but we started telling the visitor when they came into the museum, hey, we've got new content and there's a location-aware map and all you have to do is download our new app for free in the App Store. And then we saw a 10 to 12% download rate.
So then we started using social media to integrate the app, and we were posting about the exciting content of the different tours on our social media platforms. We also, the museum hosted Open House Chicago. It's a big event in Chicago, over 200 historic sites participate in. We saw over 2,500 visitors in 2 days. So we decided to go paperless this year. We asked visitors to download the app and to use the interactive map, and we had volunteers on site to help with any questions that they might have had.
Your mobile app should not be a static project. You should be able to continue to use it, to continue to tell stories, and to make sure that it stays relevant to your space and to the visitor. One thing that we have done with that is to highlight the other tours that the museum is giving and give a piece of it in the mobile.
So we created hype around the app by hosting different events for visitors to try it out and then promoting those events online. So we hosted an after-hours event. It was free admission, free food, and it was the official launch of the event or of the app. We had over 200 people attend, and Encurate staff was on site to answer any questions that they had. We were also open on Halloween. We were open for late hours, and we created a special Morbid Morsels tour for our visitors, and this highlighted extremely morbid parts of the museum, and visitors really enjoyed that content.
It was really cool. It was very gruesome. There was a push notification that said, how long do you think it would take you to saw off someone's leg? The last thing we're doing is data collection. So we have asked visitors to use the app during their visit, a device that we provide. We've talked to over 100 visitors about this. And we don't tell them what guided tours they can take in the app. And as soon as they come back and to give us the device back and take their survey, one of the first things that they say is, I loved hearing about Eleanor. Over half of the visitors even said her name. They didn't say, I liked hearing about that new information or new content, but it was Eleanor. And so that untold story is really being told in the mobile app, and we can't wait to expand on it. So thank you so much for coming this morning. We would love to talk to you more about it, so we are happy to take any questions that you guys have, and our contact information is up here as well. Yeah?
I have a question about the way you use the beacons.
Yes.
So were you mostly using gallery overview beacons, or were you actually using them for specific objects? And did you have more than one beacon in a small space, and how did that work? Because that's
Yeah, great question. So yes and yes. We have about 20 beacons in the space. There's 4 floors on the museum, 4 floors of exhibitions. And then we don't have a beacon in every room, but it's close. And we're using the beacons, we've programmed the beacons so that they can give more than one piece of content. And so we're able to highlight 2 or 3 objects in one room with one beacon, and then that also is for the location-aware map to tell the visitor what room they're in.
Sorry, I have a follow-up.
Oh, it's okay.
Okay, so I walk in a room and it pushes maybe 3 objects onto my menu, and then I can choose those objects, or does it only give me one message and then I walk up to a case and then another beacon triggers the space?
Both. So if your app is in the background, because you want your visitor to be enjoying your space. So if your app has gone into the background, then they get a push notification. There's one up there, like the how long does it take to saw off someone's leg push notification. If you are looking at your app and you have it open, then you get a page that shows you what room you're in, and then the items related to the interest that you chose in the room, and you can choose it from there. Yeah. Yeah.
Are y'all checking out devices, or do you expect everybody to use it?
Both. Yes, so there is a device available at the museum, and then we first tell people to download it, and then if they don't have a device, then they're able to lend one out. Any other questions? Okay, awesome. Well, thank you so much for coming this morning. If you think of anything later, please shoot us an email, and enjoy the rest of your afternoon at the conference.
Yeah, as an intern for the summer
Hi.
program. Yeah.
Oh, yeah, of course. Yep, we're all done.
Yeah, it's not,
It is.
Yep. I never got to.
yes.
Oh, I'm sorry.
No, that's fine. Don't worry, I was not gonna take it this time. Thank you. Did it go well? It did. Good.
No, that's totally fine. Everything is totally smooth. Cool. Yeah. I went back and found my old tweet from when I was at the museum. I was like, guys, I get to introduce this. Can't believe you had to push notifications for how long it would take to follow. I mean, I can believe it, but that's all. It was great.
I don't think so. We have some videos, but I don't think they have any audio. Cool, thank you. All right. I'm sorry. No, it's they just think it was listening. Thank you. All right, guys, you want to come line up? Let's do it. Oh.
Do you want to sit line up behind?
Yeah, just because I think it'll make it go faster. Otherwise, we'll lose precious moments. And I'm gonna stay here so that you can hear my little timer guy. All right. Welcome to the first ever Scholarship Lightning Talks. I'm Laura Hoffman. I'm a co-chair of the Scholarship Committee, and that is part of the Professional Development Track at MCN, which includes the First Timers Orientation, Speed Networking, and How to Present at MCN. So this professional development track is generously supported by the Museum Studies program at Johns Hopkins. This year we have 15 scholars from all over the country and the world. You'll hear from 8 here. There's 7 going on right next door. So we have people from England, Australia, it spans Canada, so it's great. For the first time we're doing this, so bear with us. They're going to be really lightning talk. They're going to be 3.5 minutes long. So for the sake of time, just hold all questions and applause till the end. It's going to be very presidential debate style of keep it on track. So we are going to get started. Also, feel free to tweet at using the hashtag MCN Scholar. All right. And away we go.
Just arrow to advance.
Just arrow to
All
advance.
right.
Oh, also make sure everyone, you go into the microphone because that's how they're doing audio.
Okay. Good morning, everyone. My name is Kate Betts, and I would like to talk ship with you today. In the fall of 2014, the Bullock Texas State History Museum began an 8-month process to reconstruct a 17th century shipwreck as part of our special exhibition, La Belle, the ship that changed history. And if you don't know the story of LaSalle and La Belle and his trip to Texas and why it's part of the Six Flags Over Texas, you should look it up because it's really amazing, but I don't have time in 3.5 minutes. So this process gave us an incredible opportunity to share a developing story with our audience, but a challenge as to how we could share with the audience outside of our walls. So we started with our assets, and that included 1.6 million artifacts, including the remains of this ship itself. Okay, 600,000 of them were individual glass beads, however, still a lot, more than all the other French colonial sites in North America combined. A curator, a conservator, and an exhibit tech who were on site every day doing this rebuilding process. They were scientists though, so our other asset was educators who liked to talk to humans through a variety of methods. So, we came up with Talk and Ship, which was a bi-weekly 20-minute program that we hosted both on-site and online on Friday afternoons. Each program was hosted by an educator and featured the build team, giving progress reports, answering frequently asked questions, and covering a variety of relevant thematic topics. It was streamed via the live stream platform, and we took questions both before and during the program via all of our social channels. I would also say that over the course of the program, we were able to focus on particular audience segments. So we did one at spring break specifically for families, we did several specifically for teachers, and then we did a variety of them that were for various adult populations. So, what did we learn about ourselves, our successes, our failures, our engagement? Number one, it was way more labor intensive than us naive educators thought that it was going to be. It wasn't just 2 people, one with a camera and one with an iPad. It was a lot more involved so that we could create the kind of product that our museum wanted us to have. It was also tough to maintain this enthusiasm over the course of every other week programs for 8 months. So we learned a lot via that. It was also a definite learning curve both for ourselves and our audience to talk to each other. Specifically, it's really hard to answer complex historical questions in 140 characters, and it's really hard to train your audience to use a hashtag that you can track if you've never done that before. I know that all of you in the room know that, but we didn't really know that. But that being said, it really gave us our first real way to have two-way engagement with our audience on any kind of online platform and let the audience guide the conversation of a program in a way that we had never been able to do before. And being the official State History Museum of Texas, it got us closer than we've ever been to actually fulfilling our geographic mandate and serving people across the state of Texas. So, was it a perfect program? It sure wasn't. But we have a lot of remaining questions, including how do we track stats, which stats do we track, and what does success mean going forward? But jumping in so fully for a program that we did more than 16 times forced us to keep trying, keep adjusting, and has led to greater institutional willingness in future programs. And we got this amazing Play-Doh model from a 4th grade student. We got a teacher who did a distance learning program, came on site and tweeted at us during Talk and Ship, and we really got to practice our hashtag game. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Andrea Ledesma, and today I'll be talking to you about wide open spaces, APIs, and big data in the museum.
So APIs have made for a more accessible museum. It's turned our birds, our bugs, and our butterflies into bits of data that power our apps, our interactives, our webs, and our interactive experiences. But the data itself is ripe for interpretation. Data is messy, data is stable, but above all, data tells a story. So how can we use big data to enrich interpretation, curation, and audience engagement? To find out, my collaborator and I dug into the data of the Harvard Art Museums. Using a small Python script, we scraped their API to create a corpus of data from their collections records. We have a pretty limited computing capacity, so we've only been able to work with the 4,000 plus records related to the sculpture collection. But nonetheless, we processed these materials using OpenRefine and Tableau. And what we found was a window into the curatorial histories and potential future of the museum. For one, the world of sculpture looks pretty different depending on where you're standing. Objects on view in the museum tend to be French, American, Italian, German, as you see here, even though the collection represents over 120 individual cultures. In the case of Central Asian works, for example, the museum has 84 objects that have never been on display. At the same time, about 20% of this collection ranks below, quote, adequate, meaning the objects require at least more contextual research or at worst, baseline verification. This data reveals the curatorial needs within the collection. What objects merit new or further interpretation? What cultures have been underrepresented in exhibition practice? Addressing these statistics could help us create a more holistic representation of the collection for the public. At the same time, we learned that objects have the power to reach well beyond their curatorial context in the museum. What we found was that generally there was a strong correlation between exhibition count and online engagement, but it was the discrepancies between the two that proved the most interesting to us. For example, the death mask of Amedeo Modigliani, seen here, has over 1,000 page views and 800 of them being unique, but an exhibition count of 0. So thinking of these numbers as indicators of user or visitor experience, we find new strategies for audience engagement. How can this data impact the way we create our online and in-gallery experiences? And last, we started thinking overall about how an API opens and obscures a collection. We chose the Harvard Art Museum's API for its detailed documentation. We really liked how it was structured according to the rigidity of art history and collections management practice, but also tracked the institutional history of every object. But what more can be done? This data is machine readable, but it's not entirely human accessible. It definitely prefaces a particular user and perspective, and thinking of an API as a seminal moment in the transparent and participatory movement of a museum, we had to ask, how can an API be structured in a way that welcomes expanded interpretation across broader audiences? How can a visitor interact with a collection in the same way as a curator? And above all, how do the stories we tell with data cultivate this relationship between a museum, its community, and the story at hand? So clearly there's a lot more to be mined here, and my collaborator and I are actively working to build this project out. We're thinking of an experiment that will probably pull more of this collections data, as well as notions of museum transparency, user interface design, and of course the visitor experience. So if you're curious, feel free to come and find me after this. Otherwise, thank you so much.
Hi, my name is Emily Kotecki. I'm from the North Carolina Museum of Art, and today I'm going to be talking to you about a video conference program that we piloted in this last year, where we connected with a makerspace on the coast of North Carolina. We did this because we were part of an IMLS planning grant where we explored how art museums can be a critical part of the future of education. And as part of that, we went to a distance learning summit at Crystal Bridges Museum of Art, where we were exploring solutions to a similar question. And in that summit, there were ideas thrown out about what if we could scan the objects and send the 3D models to schools and they could print them. And the colleagues that went with me, we all thought, it's actually not too far out of an idea. So we worked with our Egyptologist. She was a very willing curator and participant in this, and helped us identify objects in the collection to scan. And the reasons that we picked the objects that we did is because there are two objects that we scanned, and they were made of faience. And faience was the first man-made material created 5,000 years ago. And so she helped us think about that idea of making and materiality as it started in like the cradle of civilization 5,000 years ago, and how it can connect to the idea of making and materiality today, and especially with 3D printing. We don't have a makerspace at our museum, so we partnered with Hunt Library, which is at NC State, and they have an incredible resource. So they let us scan the images and print them, and this is actually a scale model of what we printed there. So I got to keep one. But we got to send the image files at least to the school. And so the students would print them. They would use them as catalysts for their research and observation. They developed questions for Caroline in anticipation of that live video conference. So this is Caroline in the galleries. The objects, the amulet that is right behind her, that little light green, safely back in its case. It had never left the museum before we took it out to Hunt Library, so it was kind of fun. But she's having a 30 to 45-minute conversation with these students on the coast, using the questions that they had sent in to spark the conversation and talk about her career. We did it twice to be able to kind of refine it each time. This is from the second time, and this is, I guess, kind of the power in of live video, where we had a group of middle school students that were there at the museum for a tour, and they saw what we were doing, and they just kept creeping closer and closer to the video. And before we know it, on the left side, they were photobombing the whole thing and talking to the other school and was like, follow me on Instagram. So, which was funny. And anyway, so it's the power of live video, whether you're talking with the curator or with people that are there. So we'll have to maybe be mindful of that in the future. But this is a pilot program. We're looking to scale it since there is an emergence of makerspaces in schools and we have objects that we can scan. Successes are that it's cross-disciplinary. It can connect to math and science and social studies. It can be applied to all grade levels. We're looking to focus it at 6th to 12th grade. And that we have the power of live conversation from the galleries and to speak from our museum. The lessons learned is that Caroline will not always have 30 to 40 minutes several times a week to talk to students. We're looking to kind of pre-record some information from her but still have a live component in the galleries with educator or staff. And while there's an emergence of 3D printers, not all schools have them. There's an equity issue we're looking at and trying to see what we can do to kind of explore that solution to that. And while we have a mobile cart, our museum Wi-Fi isn't strong enough, so we might have to plug in and kind of weigh that balance of being a mobile cart while being plugged in. So that's just some lessons learned as we think about scaling. Thanks.
So good morning. My name is Rosemary Willink, and I recently embarked on a PhD project called Is Architecture Art? Everyone can hear me? Yeah, good. So it's a collaboration with 5 other researchers based in Australia and Belgium and funded by the Australian Research Council and the University of Queensland. Prior to this, I worked in strategy and governance at the Gallery of Modern Art in Queensland, and I gave a presentation yesterday on measuring the risks when we present major exhibitions. So right now, my aim is to persuade you that the question, is architecture art, is an interesting one. That it's relevant to a sector grappling with questions of sustainability in the face of rapid technological change. So we don't propose to answer the question with a simple yes or no. Rather, we will track and describe the places and circumstances where the question has been asked and sometimes answered. You might be thinking, why architecture? Because architecture is the epitome of what we call a creative industry. It can trade cultural values with hard currency, and at the same time, it provokes individual aesthetic responses and strengthens cultural identification, whether that be local, regional, or national. As far as we're aware, no one has put this distinction so sharply, nor measured the implications for the cultural institutions which inhabit or commission this architecture. And these implications can be structural. The decision by MoMA to dissolve the curatorial department for architecture and design in favour of its integration with capital A art. They can be financial. The Met's expansion to include the former Whitney Museum building, now rebranded the Met Breuer, swiftly followed by a financial restructure. And they can be strategic. The partnership between the V&A Museum in London and the Smithsonian Institute in Washington, DC, to curate exhibitions in London's Olympic Park. Pictured here is just a teaser from the London Design Biennial, where visitors to Somerset House could experience the pen and immersion room developed by the Cooper Hewitt. So beyond measuring these implications, we're interested in emerging institutional structures. For us, a key example is at the Serpentine Galleries in London's Hyde Park, whose pavilion program has not only inspired a number of other architectural endeavours by museums, but it also pays for itself. This pavilion, designed by the architect Sel Gascano, was purchased by the co-working space Second Home. So there are a number of other examples of emerging institutional structures. At MCN this year, there were sessions dedicated to museums and incubators, public-private partnerships, and funding tech projects. So far, I've learned a lot from these sessions and from conversations with many of you over the past 3 days, and I look forward to sharing this research with you at forums like this in the future. Thanks.
Hi, my name is Eliza Senna, and I wanted to share a project I worked on at the Metropolitan Museum of Art called Met Kids. Met Kids is an online feature and video series that embodies the spirit of the human-centered museum, with the goal of the project to be truly for, with, and by kids. I'm going to focus on 3 ways the Met put its young audience first: by allowing them to inform the design of the site, to co-create content, and to continue to engage with Met Kids in the museum and online. Listening to our users was key in planning the site. The 7 to 12-year-old audience is often overlooked at museums, with programming for teens and toddlers or materials for parents and teachers. Met Kids puts kids in charge and takes their questions and curiosity seriously. We held 4 user feedback sessions at the museum, speaking with a diverse group of over 175 kids from around New York City, the country, and internationally. They sounded off on everything from the UX design of the site, how it looked, the content, and even how they like to learn. Their thoughts were extremely impactful for how the site was designed, most notably through the 3 main navigation channels. In addition to video content, which kids told us that they really wanted, they told us that they thought of the Met's encyclopedic collection like a giant time machine. So we created the time machine search filter, allowing them to search by time, location, and theme. They also told us that they wanted to explore the museum at their own pace. So we created the Met Kids map, where they could explore over 200 artworks through the sprawling map with different dots that related to artworks. This is an example of a Met Kids digital label on the map. And several design decisions were based on kids' feedback, including moving the fun fact to the top, including a glossary that we worked with the New York City Blueprint for the Arts on, and scaffolding and separating the information into smaller, easier to read pieces. In addition to informing the design of the site, we really wanted the audience to take an active hand as makers in the content. They told us that kids liked learning from their own peers. Met Kids features short films that kids made during several digital animation labs, as well as kid reporter videos where they went behind the scenes at the museum and interviewed experts from across the museum, including scientists, curators, artists, even the director of the museum himself, Thomas Campbell. Rather than telling kids what they should be asking, we listened to them. And they ended up asking about things that many people were curious about, including how do we get artworks into the museum, or what happens if something breaks. The last part of the equation was to continue engaging with this audience, both in the museum and online. And we do this through the Met Kids blog, where kids can send us their questions, their artworks, or be interviewed about their visits to the museum. Met Kids also holds a series of digital labs at the museum, where kids can animate or tell stories about works of art. By creating their own content for the Met Kids site, they get to engage with the museum in a way that makes them feel that the museum is truly a place for them. Common Sense Media, the Parents' Choice Foundation, and even Goop have responded enthusiastically to how the Met Kids project has put kids first. I hope that other museums and institutions can make the commitment to learn from its young audience as the Met has. You can check it out at www.metmuseum.org/metkids. Thank you so much.
Hello, everyone. My name is Sarah. I am the learning content producer for the Royal Ontario Museum. So for anyone who has not been to my beautiful country, it's really big. Ontario is a very large province within a very big country. So even though we are Ontario's museum, most of our on-site visits are pulled from these 5 school boards. And even within these 5 boards, transportation is becoming more of a barrier every year. So the learning department has been looking at ways at overcoming this barrier. And one of the things we were looking at is virtual visits. Now we tried a few things. Our early virtual visits were straight up Skype, no bells and whistles, just to talk. Then we tried this cool platform, which essentially let us talk about PowerPoint slides, and we could have a video connection if the school's infrastructure supported it. And we've done some experiments with Google Hangouts and other platforms like that, but we don't currently have a formal virtual visits offering in place. And that's because even though all of these programs had their advantages and they had varying degrees of interactivity, what all of them boiled down to was a class full of listening students and a talking head. And where once this was really new and revolutionary, they didn't have the opportunity to talk to an expert in another place that was not at their school, now they can do this pretty much anytime they want. So the program was no longer working for us. We needed to rethink it and switch it around for a 21st century learner. So we decided to try and make the learning active. But how do we do that? So one thing we came up with was, let's try Minecraft. Now, there have been lots of really cool projects done with different museums and different educators using Minecraft, but to our surprise, as we looked into it, we couldn't really find anybody using it to talk about mining. And since we have this new gallery that is all about responsible mining, that's where we wanted to start with our pilot program. So this is totally in development, but we do have some proof of concept footage. And the idea is they start off divided up into 3 villages. They have to find their way there. They will get periodic instruction from books like this, but for the most part, they are on their own within this world. And they find their way to their villages, and each village is rich in particular resources the other ones don't have. There's building resources, biological resources, mineral resources, and the students are the ones in charge of how those resources are allocated. They need to figure out how are they going to feed the village. They need to figure out how they are going to interact with indigenous populations. They have to figure out how they're going to survive in a world that becomes increasingly hostile as the program goes on. Ultimately, they need to create some kind of structure that requires resources from all 3 villages. But how they obtain those resources, by trading and sharing or by fighting each other for them, is up to them. Whatever decision they make, there will be real-world discussions and applications to be had. The program is also designed that it can be modular and it can scale. We can add on educates that we send to the school so they have the resources in front of them. We have sessions with an educator over a virtual connection. We have on-site visits that they can add if they're close enough, and resources available on the learning portal. What it all adds up to is a first-person experience. By being in charge of their own decisions and by facing real consequences to those decisions, they have a frame of reference that lets them empathize and understand some of the really complex concepts that surround a topic like responsible mining. Thank you.
Nice dino dress, by the way. Hey, how's everyone doing? Cool? All right. Well, my name is Maria del Carmen Barrios Giordano. I'm currently Crest Interpretive Fellow at the Isabella Stewart Gardner Museum. That is a very recent development. And until recently, I was curatorial assistant to the Art++ initiative, because I have ridiculous titles like that, at Cantor Art Center, which is Stanford University's art museum. And I'm going to be talking about a project that I was pretty much in charge of, which is called Art++. So Art++ is basically an augmented reality application, and it was built to serve as an art interpretive tool. So augmented reality, as we all know, is sort of a loosey-goosey term. Augmented reality refers to any sort of computer-generated content, usually graphics, that are overlaid on a user's natural field of vision. These can include animations, they can include static video, and they can also include 2D graphics, which is what Art++ does. So we decided that we were going to use basically image recognition. So you use the app to recognize something that's on the wall, and you get these pinned two-dimensional graphics as interpretive content when you're using it. So we developed it in a sort of iterative process, and we had to learn how to use this new medium as an actual interpretation tool, because a lot of the interpretation tools that we have nowadays are language-based. And augmented reality doesn't actually have to be language-based, it can be visual-based. So it can be all about providing interpretive images for artwork. And because we were doing that, we were basically learning on the fly how to use AR as an interpretive resource. We are, again, at Stanford, so we follow sort of the Stanford D-School iterative development process. And we found out through that iterative development that there were a couple of things that did not work very well as augmented reality content. The first is comparative images. This is mostly a design issue. When you have a fixed amount of screen time, it's very difficult to figure out where to put comparative images that won't take up a lot of real estate, but they can also be very gratuitous. A comparative image, I can show an image of another painting by the same artist. I can show a picture of the artist. I can show a picture of like comparative brushwork, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. I can build and build and build. So we figured out that very early on that they weren't just the best to actually help people understand the artwork that they were looking at. We could go on all sorts of tangents with them. The second thing was guided viewing. So this was through direct markers that we put on top of the image itself that they were scanning. And again, this is sort of a design issue that when you are holding up a device with both hands, as you usually are when you're using IR, you have very limited finger capabilities. So direct markers on images are actually very difficult to reach with your fingers. And guided viewing tends to be something that is better done by someone who's talking you through. So we decided to leave that to the docents. So what did work, if you were at our presentation this morning, were direct overlays, which are what they sound like. You use one figurative image and you put that over the item that you're looking at. Panoramas, which are basically 360 images like you find on Google Street View. And series, and these are basically layers that show you how a piece of artwork was created through steps. So in this particular case, this was a printed textile, and you can see the different colors of the prints as you go on. So that was what we learned about AR content, and if you're interested in the Art++ project, you can talk to me more about it. Thank you.
Hi, everybody. I'm Michelle Herman, the Digital Experience Manager at Archives of American Art, Smithsonian. I apologize if anybody was in the case study. There are going to be some repeated slides, so just warning you in advance. So I'm going to just quickly talk about some of the user research we did in our recent redesign, which is very close to launching. So our website, for those of you who don't know us, we collect the primary papers of American artists, so sketchbooks, letters, photographs, and make them available for research. So our website is mission critical, and for many it's our primary presence. Most of the users to our website are actually not in DC, so we know that the website really needs to be robust enough for them. Additionally, as I just said, researchers are our primary audience. And they are of different experience levels in terms of searching. So with the website, we are taking all of these data points into consideration. One of the tools we used was looking at our Google Analytics. About 90% of our activity is in the collection section, and users actually typically bypass our homepage, coming in either directly from Google onto collection records, or they just go to the collections landing page. Another tool we used was 4C survey feedback. So this is the chart for the last 2 years of our satisfaction levels, and it helped us prioritize the problems that we had. So they were navigation, search, and look and feel. We also looked at some heat maps, which helped us understand user behavior, where they were clicking. You could see that in this view, they're really clicking on the search button, but then they're also going to collections. But then there's also behavior that suggests browsing abilities and that they want to be able to browse. This is an alphabetical index, and A just happens to be the most popular click. We also did some A/B testing of some of the changes that we plan to implement. So we actually are putting a big search box on the homepage, and we saw some pretty encouraging results, reducing bounce rate and increasing the average pages per session and the session duration. We also were able to use heat maps in that A/B testing, so it was a win-win. And that's about it. I went through mine real quick, sorry. If you're interested in learning more, feel free to talk to me, and thank you.
Let's give it up for our scholars. Yay. So we are right at 10 o'clock, and I know you guys have sessions after, so if you want to stick around and ask questions, I think they'll hang out for a couple minutes. Also, feel free to tweet at us, and thanks so much for being a part of this experiment. Thanks, guys.